The signs were hidden in plain sight, etched in stone, and whispered in hymns with the first serial killer ever recorded. For centuries, no one asked why the same kind of victim kept vanishing. But once you start to question the divine, the mask begins to crack, and you'll find the answer. Picture the world's first cities rising from the mud between two rivers. Mesopotamia in 2200 BCE wasn't just a collection of villages, it was an explosion of human organization. Massive ziggurats dominated the skyline, while merchants traded barley, wool, and copper in crowded markets below. Every aspect of life followed strict rules set by the gods and enforced by kings. The social structure was brutal and unforgiving. At the top stood the temple priests who could read the will of the gods in sheep livers. Below them, scribes recorded everything from grain shipments to marriage contracts in wedge-shaped symbols pressed into damp clay. Slaves made up nearly a third of the population, captured in wars or born into bondage. There was no middle class, just a small elite and masses of laborers who worked the fields from sunrise to sunset. Justice came swift and harsh in this world. If you stole a loaf of bread, your hand might be cut off. Dispute a debt? You could be thrown into debt slavery. Murder was common, but followed predictable patterns: battlefields, blood feuds between families, or the occasional tavern brawl gone wrong. Killing someone without clear justification? That simply didn't happen in their records. Temple records from Ur show how they dealt with violent crimes. One tablet describes a man who killed another during a quarrel. His punishment was paying 40 silver shekels to the victim's family. Another records compensation paid when a construction accident killed workers. But deliberate, secretive murder? That wasn't in their legal vocabulary yet. This society ran like a machine where everyone had fixed roles. Temple workers prepared offerings, bakers baked bread, and guards protected the granaries. Even death followed ritual patterns: proper burials for citizens, mass graves for slaves. When someone died unexpectedly, they assumed it was the god's will. Maybe the person offended a deity or broke a taboo. The idea that a respected member of society might be quietly eliminating people one by one, that thought wouldn't have crossed their minds. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people lived crowded together in mud brick houses packed along narrow streets. Families shared walls with their neighbors, and temple workers lived in attached dormitories. Privacy barely existed. Someone always knew your business. This made the coming events even more disturbing because in such close quarters, secrets were nearly impossible to keep. The clay tablets tell us about their fears: vengeful gods, failed harvests, invading armies. Nowhere do they mention fearing each other. Their legal codes focus on property disputes and accidental injuries, not premeditated killings by trusted individuals. When young temple workers started dying unexpectedly, they reached for familiar explanations: curses, bad omens, divine displeasure. The truth was far worse than anything their worldview could accommodate. What happens when an advanced civilization encounters a horror it doesn't have words for? How does a society built on rigid order process something that violates every rule? The answers lie in fragments of clay scattered across museum collections worldwide, pieces of a puzzle no Sumerian scribe ever wanted to solve. Their records hold traces of something they couldn't quite bring themselves to name, evidence of a shadow moving through their carefully ordered world. The temple records from Lagash first showed the pattern: unusual clusters of deaths in otherwise healthy young adults. These weren't the typical casualties of war or workplace accidents that scribes normally documented. The victims shared disturbing similarities: temple attendants, musicians, and junior priests, all in positions of trust within the religious hierarchy. Their deaths occurred within months of each other, recorded with unusual brevity for people of their stature. Tablets from the city's archives describe the deaths with unusual vagueness. One entry simply states, "The singer Nanshe went to sleep and did not wake." Another reports, "The cupbearer Lugal, Azida, was taken by night vapors." The scribes avoided direct explanations, using terms like hand of God and night visitor. Rather than stating obvious facts, none showed signs of injury and none suffered from known illnesses. What made these deaths stand out was their timing and location. Burial records show 6 victims died between sunset and sunrise over 14 months. All slept in the temple dormitories, where healthy young servants should have lived for decades. An economic tablet from the same period lists unexpected replacements for these positions, valuable trained workers lost with no clear cause. Modern translators notice something the ancient scribes likely missed. 7 tablets mention a purification ritual performed after each death. The same phrase appears each time. The chamber was swept with fire. This wasn't standard procedure. Normal temple cleanings use water and incense. One record even specifies the bedding was burned, an extreme measure reserved for plague victims, except no plague was recorded in Lagash that year. The scribes seemed uneasy about these events. One administrator's note reads, "Third barley ration this moon given to Gigir's household, may the gods look away from this sorrow." Another tablet unusually combines a death record with an omen reading, something normally done separately, as if trying to force an explanation where none existed. Pay attention to who wasn't dying. Temple guards, cooks, and cleaners, those who slept in separate quarters, showed no unusual mortality. Only those who shared sleeping spaces with the elite suffered these sudden ends. Even more telling, the deaths stopped whenever the high priest Enlil-Masu traveled to other cities, only to resume upon his return. The most revealing record comes from a damaged tablet now in the British Museum. A junior scribe wrote, "My brother said the cupbearer cried out before the stillness took him, but the overseer says this is lying talk." The next line is broken, but contains the word "denied" before the tablet crumbles away. Burial offerings tell another part of the story. Normally, temple servants received modest funerary gifts, a clay cup, perhaps some beads. These victims were buried with more valuable items, bronze rings, carved stones, as if someone wanted to compensate for their abrupt departure. One grave contained an unusually fine lapis lazuli necklace, far beyond what a cupbearer could afford. Everything points to a pattern the Sumerians couldn't articulate. Healthy young people died suddenly at night, with no visible cause. The temple burned their belongings afterward. The deaths clustered around specific individuals and locations, and the only person present for every incident was someone no one would dare accuse, a man who performed the purification rituals himself. Some modern researchers suspect poison, perhaps something derived from local plants that left no visible traces. Others note, these deaths resemble recorded cases of ritual suffocation in later cultures. What's clear is that someone had found a way to kill without leaving marks, using methods that looked like divine intervention to terrified witnesses. The scribes kept meticulous records of these events, while carefully avoiding conclusions. They wrote around the truth in bureaucratic language, attributing deaths to gods rather than confronting the unthinkable, that within their sacred walls, someone had turned ritual knowledge into a weapon. Their hesitation makes sense. In a world where priests interpreted divine will, who would dare accuse one of murder? As more tablets surface, a chilling timeline emerges. Each death follows a similar sequence. The victim dines with temple officials, retires to sleep, and never wakes. A purification follows. Then months later, another, never more than 3 in a year, just enough to avoid suspicion, but always the same type of victim. Someone was testing methods, learning, refining, and the temple's own record-keeping system preserved every detail. These clay documents were never meant to be read together across centuries. The scribes assumed each tablet would be stored separately, their troubling connections overlooked. Only now, with records from multiple collections combined, does the full picture emerge, one of history's first perfect crimes, hidden in plain sight for millennia. Next comes the hardest question. Who would dare commit such acts, and how did they avoid suspicion in a society where everyone watched everyone else? The answer lies in the very tablets that recorded the deaths. The palace records hold one name that appears too often to be coincidence. Enlil-Masu served as the high priest of Lagash for 19 years, overseeing temple rituals and managing hundreds of workers. His signature appears on ration lists, purification rites, and workforce assignments. But modern researchers noticed another pattern. His name consistently appears near records of suspicious deaths. Look closely at the tablets. One details how Enlil-Masu personally selected 6 new singers 3 months before the first musician's death. Another shows he changed the sleeping arrangements in the temple dormitory weeks beforehand. Economic records reveal he authorized unusually large burial gifts for each victim. When archaeologists cross-referenced these tablets with death records, the connection became impossible to ignore. Surprisingly, bulky personnel documents survive from Enlil-Masu's reign. Most high priests kept simple lists. Enlil-Masu recorded minute details about temple workers. One tablet catalogues physical traits. The cupbearer Lugal Azida has a birthmark on his left shoulder. Another notes sleep habits. The singer Nanshe sleeps heavily after wine. This level of personal observation was unheard of in bureaucratic records. 3 separate tablets mention Enlil-Masu conducting night inspections of the dormitories. Normal temple oversight happened during daylight. Night visits were exceptionally rare. One junior scribe wrote, "The high priest entered after midnight carrying a lamp. In the morning, the baker's apprentice could not be roused." The scribe scratched out the next line, but infrared scans reveal the words, "His breath smelled strange." The temple's normal routines shifted under Enlil-Masu's leadership. He introduced new purification rituals requiring private sessions with initiates. Older priests complained in veiled terms. One tablet grumbles about unseemly attention to the young ones. Another warns against those who use sacred rites for earthly pleasures. Unusually direct language for temple records. Financial documents show curious patterns too. Enlil-Masu maintained a private storage room with expensive imported herbs. Records list shipments of Kurgara plants from the eastern mountains, known today as a toxic nightshade variety. The same tablets note these herbs were for the god's chamber, yet no ritual texts mention such ingredients. When Enlil-Masu traveled, the deaths stopped. Temple rolls from his absences show normal mortality rates, but within days of his return, another young worker would perish unexpectedly. The timing was too precise. One victim died the evening of Enlil-Masu's homecoming feast. 6 definite victims connect directly to him, but researchers suspect more. The British Museum houses a broken tablet listing 17 temple workers who went to the gods during Enlil-Masu's tenure. Normal turnover for such a staff would be 3 or 4 deaths annually from natural causes. Why did no one stop him? Status protected Enlil-Masu completely. As high priest, he interpreted divine will. Questioning him meant questioning the gods. Economic tablets show he controlled food distributions to other priests' families, creating dependency. One scribe who noted irregularities suddenly received triple rations for his children. Modern scholars call him the Sumerian Reaper not just for the deaths, but for how he harvested trust. He manipulated the temple's own record-keeping system, documenting his actions openly because no one would dare connect them. His victims entered the bureaucracy as routine notations, their true fates hidden behind sacred euphemisms. The most chilling evidence comes from his personal archive. Enlil-Masu kept detailed logs of purification rituals performed after each death. These included precise timings. At the 3rd hour, the chamber was cleansed. Normal rites followed lunar cycles. Only someone covering evidence would care about clock time. One tablet describes disposing of night vessels, a term never found in other temple texts. His reign ended abruptly. Records show Enlil-Masu went to the gods himself at age 54, unusually young for a high priest. His successor ordered all personal tablets sealed in a storeroom that later burned. Whether this was coincidence or cover-up, we'll never know. What kind of man could do this? The answer hides in gaps between the lines, in the extra details he recorded, the routines he changed, and the deaths that followed him like shadows. The Sumerian Reaper didn't need secrecy. He used bureaucracy itself as his weapon, trusting the system would never turn on one of its own architects. Now we face a darker question. Why would someone in his position take such risks? The motives become clearer when you examine the ritual items found near victims' quarters, objects that had nothing to do with temple service and everything to do with one man's private obsessions. To understand the Sumerian Reaper's motives, one must first appreciate how ancient Mesopotamians viewed human fate. In their eyes, nothing happened by chance. If someone died young, the gods willed it. A failed harvest? A deity's displeasure. This worldview left no space for the idea that a human might kill for personal reasons. That's what makes Enlil-Masu's crimes so chilling. They broke every rule of how people made sense of their world. As high priest, Enlil-Masu had privileged access to this belief system. He knew exactly how deaths would be interpreted. When a young servant was reported as taken by night vapors, it was accepted as divine punishment, not foul play. He could supervise purification rituals after each death, cleansing evidence while appearing devout. No one suspected the god's servant himself might be the killer. The motives emerging from the tablets are complex. Power is one possibility, removing rivals or dissenters, but many victims weren't political threats. Lust might have played a role. Some victims were attractive young attendants. Yet burial gifts complicate that theory. One victim received jewelry worth 6 months' wages, suggesting a personal attachment rather than a casual disposal. The ritual elements hint at even darker motives. Some tablets mention Enlil-Masu performing private ceremonies with initiates before their deaths, testing their devotion through unknown means. Modern scholars note parallels to cult practices, where leaders control followers through staged supernatural experiences. The purification rituals themselves included peculiar elements: precise herbs burned at set times, bedding burned instead of cleaned. These weren't standard practices, they were personalized performances tailored to Enlil-Masu's obsessions. Financial records add another layer. As keeper of the temple storerooms, Enlil-Masu oversaw stocks of medicinal plants. Monthly ledgers show suspicious shortages marked for special rites. Some of these plants, like Kagara, could paralyze a person in small doses. Their use correlates exactly with periods when deaths occurred. The same records show wine shipments spiking before each incident, suggesting victims were sedated. Psychological clues emerge from his behavior. He insisted on dressing corpses himself, an unusual role for a high priest. One tablet records him interrogating survivors about victims' last moments with unsettling curiosity. His record-keeping was obsessive, detailing sleeping positions, last meals, even eyelids that wouldn't close. It's as if he documented every detail to savor it later. Unlike executioners, who killed openly, Enlil-Masu murdered under cover of sanctity. He staged deaths to look natural: no blood, no screams. He carefully timed them during festivals when explanations would be least questioned. His actions show both fear of exposure and a kind of artistry, refining his methods, testing his power over life and death. Most unsettling is that these murders serve no clear political goal. They didn't consolidate power or bring wealth. Instead, they suggest a man experimenting, perfecting his craft simply because he could. The clay figurines found near victims' quarters reveal another layer: small bound human shapes with pins stuck through limbs. These match later Mesopotamian curse traditions, suggesting the killer wove black magic into his crimes. Enlil-Masu's story warns us how easily absolute power can corrupt. Ancient society never suspected him because their worldview couldn't imagine such evil. By exploiting their faith, he manipulated an entire civilization's understanding of reality. Today, scholars piece this puzzle together from clay fragments, records intended to serve bureaucracy, now revealing hidden horrors their authors couldn't name. The question now is how modern technology helped us reassemble this ancient story. Piecing together this 4,000-year-old crime required tackling two challenges: scattered evidence and the assumption these records had nothing to do with murder. The British Museum held death records, the Louvre stored temple inventories, Istanbul's Archaeological Museum kept personnel lists. For a century, scholars studied them separately, missing the patterns hiding in plain sight. The breakthrough came when researchers noticed recurring phrases across these collections. The term "hand of darkness" appeared on 17 tablets, usually interpreted as bad luck. Yet every mention coincided with a suspicious death. Night purification, found in 3 museums, dated to Enlil-Masu's tenure. These were not random phrases but coded references to something sinister. Modern imaging technology revealed connections. Multispectral scans exposed erased text. The high priest ordered the sleeping mats burned again. Infrared revealed scratched-out words, bloodless like the others. Administrative notes suddenly took on new meaning, transferring rations to Enlil-Masu's household after night inspection. AI was critical in finding hidden links. A mundane bedding list in Kuhn's 5008-001, cross-referenced with death dates, showed replacements issued days after deaths. Another program matched personnel transfers to Enlil-Masu's direct supervision before deaths. Human scholars had missed these connections for generations. Translations revealed disturbing detail. A Yale tablet recorded, "The cupbearer coughed, could not stand, fell into endless sleep." Another from Moscow described Enlil-Masu's breath test absent in other temples. Most damning was BM 22446. The god's servant claims the singer offended Ningal, but the singers say this is false. Burial records yielded physical evidence. CT scans revealed skull hemorrhages and rib fractures consistent with suffocation, matching the peaceful deaths noted in tablets. Why did no one connect the dots then? Records were scattered across bureaucracies, temple archives, administrative lists, accountants. Only Enlil-Masu had access to everything and used that control to hide his crimes. Now comes the final question. How did such evil disappear? The answer lies in how societies choose to forget their darkest truths. If you're intrigued by these dark secrets of ancient history, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next mystery uncovered. The Sumerian Reaper challenges the notion that serial killing is a modern phenomenon. This high priest, living 4,000 years ago, exhibited chillingly familiar behaviors, selecting victims from his own community, choosing targets carefully, and developing consistent methods. Unlike today's predators who often act in secrecy, he operated with society's trust, using his religious authority to mask his crimes. Modern criminologists find disturbing parallels between Enlil-Masu and notorious killers like Ted Bundy and Harold Shipman. Like Bundy, he targeted the vulnerable under his care. Like Shipman, he used medical knowledge, ritual herbs, to kill undetected. His methodical spacing of murders mirrored the planning seen in modern cases. What makes this case particularly unsettling is the priest's use of institutional power. While today's killers often challenge authority, Enlil-Masu exploited it. Deaths were blamed on divine wrath, and his role shielded him from suspicion. His methods, poisoning, suffocation, carefully staged deaths, demonstrated psychological cunning. Victims appeared to die naturally, especially when deaths coincided with festivals, offering built-in explanations. His record-keeping was just thorough enough to satisfy oversight while avoiding detection. Forensic psychiatrists identify hallmarks of an organized killer: deliberate victim selection, rituals that reflected fantasies of control, and a gradual escalation of murders. His fascination with purification rituals mirrored modern killers' attempts at undoing their crimes. Ancient society lacked the frameworks to recognize human predators, attributing unexplained deaths to demons or gods. Economic records reveal hush payments and strategic promotions that silenced potential whistleblowers. His greatest mistake was his meticulous record-keeping. Administrative tablets meant to protect him ultimately preserved evidence of his crimes. They allowed modern scholars to connect the dots, revealing a predator hiding within the system. The Sumerian Reaper warns us that positions of trust can harbor hidden predators and that evil often thrives in plain sight. The world's first serial killer didn't lurk in alleys. He stood before altars, wearing sacred robes. Enlil-Masu's story forces us to acknowledge something unsettling. Human cruelty hasn't evolved much in 4,000 years. The same patterns appear today: predators in trusted positions, systems that hide rather than reveal, victims dismissed as unfortunate accidents. What makes this case different is how completely history erased it. No trials, no legends, just administrative notes scattered across millennia. That bureaucracy preserved the truth while ensuring no contemporary would piece it together. What do you think drove Enlil-Masu to commit these chilling crimes? Let's know in the comments below.